this before in another episode, but yeah, so many times when I put up on a whiteboard or something similar all of the things that we carry in our mind as to what a good mum is, and then we read it back, it is just so overwhelming and unrealistic. And I actually think that we have to revisit that all the time, because even if we do it once and we're like, oh yeah, that's not realistic, I need to make that more realistic, it creeps back in and creeps back in and creeps back in, and that's where that kind of guilt comes creeping back in. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to have that feeling. That's a really hard feeling to experience as a mum, because it's kind of like, well, because it's unrealistic, you're setting yourself up to fail over and over again. There is no winning that. Yeah.
I found that just recently I've had a lot of clients that are that have gone through IVF, and they have desperately wanted to be a mum, and they've worked really hard to get pregnant, and then they get to a place where they're not enjoying the motherhood experience, and I guess the anticipation of what they wanted it to be and how much they desired it compared to what it is has been there's been such a big gulf, and then that created so much guilt and shame that I wanted this, I desired this, I worked for this, and I don't like it. And that's so hard. That must I haven't experienced that, but I can hear the pain of like, this is what I wanted, but I don't like it. And how do you reconcile this feeling of I'm not enjoying it, but I wanted it, I'm grateful, but I'm unhappy, I'm struggling, but this is what I've always wanted. And I think that kind of that tension, thank you, is what's causing so much unease and potentially depression and anxiety. It's what I've always wanted and dreamed, and I worked so hard, and now I don't like it.
Yeah. And I do think that there is grief and loss always in these things, because especially if you have, because nothing goes the way you expect it. I mean, and I feel like we have a lot of ideals around being a parent, being a mum, in our head when we go into it. And Gena, you've done the Preparing for Parenthood course, so we'll talk about that as well. We've got kind of all these expectations, and it is a kind of a loss when it doesn't work out that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I often talk about two things. Is actually you are allowed to grieve your old life before kids, like that was your life, that you'd set that up. Especially what I notice is people who have children maybe into their 30s, as opposed, I mean, I had a child really young, so I didn't have an adulthood to switch from. But I noticed that, as people get into their 30s and they then have their first child, they've had a lot of adulthood to live, and so then all of a sudden it's very different. A baby just throws a spanner into how you function, how you look after yourself, your routines and structures, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And it's okay to be sad about that, and it's okay to and that's humans are so complex that we can be happy and sad at the same time. We can be in this moment of wonderful gratefulness, but also just be so distraught at the same time. And
they sit side by side, and often they do, because we've got multiple things going on in our lives, and we can feel really, really happy about that and really sad about the other thing, and which is, it's quite bizarre, isn't it? It feels weird that they sit side by side, but carry on.
It doesn't feel like there's an allowance for that. Right? Like if you're not enjoying being a mom, you're not grateful for the experience, especially if you're an IVF, or if you wanted to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom, but then you don't enjoy every minute, then you somehow are not fulfilling your role well or something, you know? It's like there's not the allowance for a dichotomy
for
of
multiple
experience, for layers.
for layers.
Yeah. And then the other part of it is, I often say, like, motherhood's a job, right? Like, you know, it's a full-time job, more than a full-time job, but it is a job. And when you take on, because a lot of people will say, like, I just don't know what to do, and I'm not doing this well, and I'm not doing it properly. But you know, every time you start a new job, you're not expected in those first, you know, if we look at the first few weeks of a new job, you're not expected to know how to do everything right. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to ask and learn. But the problem with motherhood is the job changes. You know, there's the newborn stage, and then there's the 3 to 6 month stage, and then so your job changes every sort of stage of your baby's life, and so you're allowed to question and ask and not know what to do at every stage. But there's this expectation that actually you've had a baby, you should just, you know, you've learnt the next 18 years and you're a pro at it, or you should be a pro at it already. But actually allowing that, I don't know what I'm doing. And also, you don't have to like every stage of your job. You know, maybe you're not so good at the newborns, but you're really good at having a teenager, or, you know, and that's okay. And I think I just love being able to, I think people sometimes need permission to feel differently than they should, I guess.
Than they should, or than they expected themselves to feel. It is hard. That psychological side of it is hard. And just as an example of that, just to tie into some of what you're saying, you know, one of the biggest losses that I experienced, and that's because I had a traumatic birth, a big part of that trauma was not getting I didn't get to hold him for at least an hour. And I was very, very drugged, and I'd had a very long labor. And so by the time I held him, I was very disconnected. And so, and from then on, I was quite disconnected, and I was really, really devastated by that, because I had longed for this baby my whole life. Didn't know if I could have this baby. You know, I'd been told that I may not be able to have children. You know, so all of that stuff, and then to have that moment, to not have that moment where people talk about where they fall in love with their baby. And that was devastating. That was such a loss to me. And recently, you know, and, you know, hanging out with my 13-year-old, I honestly feel like I'm in love with him, which is a weird thing to say about your 13-year-old, I know, but I feel like that around him. Like, I completely adore him, and I just think every inch of him is just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So it's just weird, you know, that, and I think about, I lost that when he was born, but I have that. And there have been moments throughout his life where I felt like that. But right now, I particularly feel like that. And I don't know exactly why. But yeah, so I kind of, just to tie into what you're saying, you know, that we do experience losses and we do experience grief, but the story is a long story. And so it's not over, you know, and there are other moments of joy to be experienced. Yeah.